that our fundamental rights are not infringed, we have to have that sensible conversation about how we keep ourselves secure.
I'm glad your freedom of information request was rejected, because mine was too, so that makes me feel better. There's some consistency there.
Well, let me tell you, John, a lot of mine do get rejected. You just got to keep trying, and you just got to phrase questions differently, and just it's a thing for consumers, because your listeners can do the same thing. If you get rejected, don't just think that that's the end of it. You think, right, okay, they obviously didn't like the question, or the question was too big. So break it down and do it in bite-sized chunks, and that way you do tend to get good answers then.
My last FOI request actually got solved by asking somebody who knew somebody. I was getting nowhere with my requests, and I was talking to somebody. Oh, I know somebody. I'll ask them, and I got the answer straight away. And then it was all sorted. Yeah.
Yeah, and indeed, it's a very good point, because there's an awful lot of Freedom of Information Act requests that can be made about travel. Many consumers don't appreciate that. I mean, some consumers to our helpline, we encourage them to do FOIA applications. But there's a slight blip on the horizon, because this government has said that they're going to curtail people's access to freedom of information. We have yet to see the devil in the detail in the legislation, but that is what they're saying they're going to do.
I do hope not. It's a nice thing to have.
It is indeed, yeah, I totally agree.
Just because they got caught out on their expenses, they want it stopped. But that's a different topic.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Checking it out before you check in on the John Guinn Travel Show on ukhealthradio.com. On my very first package holiday, happened to be in Mexico, we were warned about all sorts of things. Basically, it all came down to water, and not much of an exaggeration, I think everybody from the UK who stayed in that hotel were ill. You're warned about food and drinking too much and the sun, but what about the flight getting over there? Is the flight making you ill before you've even got to the foreign destination, which could give you the funny tummy? That's what some people believe, that because of the system used to introduce air into the aircraft, they're believing it's introducing some pollutants, which could be poisoning you, basically. And it's something that Frank from Holiday Travel Watch is concerned about. And that's the next topic we're talking about. And I wanted to know how he got involved with it in the first place.
Well, I first came into this area around 2006. And I had the very great privilege of meeting a bunch of pilots and cabin crew at House Commons. And they had formed a group to lobby the governments about what they saw as a concern in their working environments. And they invited me because they said, well, the air we breathe as pilots and crew is breathed by, consumers. And essentially, the issue is this. The majority of aircraft that are flying today are powered by engines with a bleed air system. So when you are sitting in your seat on the aircraft, the air that you're breathing, as you look out the window, is coming through the engine that's keeping the aircraft aloft. And it was in the 1950s they invented this technology, and so all aircraft engines were then manufactured with this bleed air system. The problem with the bleed air system is as it sucks air through the engine and diverts it into the air supply, the seals that keeps engine oils away from the actual airflow are faulty. There is a design flaw in them, usually at taxiing takeoff and coming into land and taxiing back again, sometimes in cruise mode, in cruise flight. And the problem is that the oils, the temperatures in the aircraft engine are absolutely huge, they're astronomical. And the chemicals, you hear the word combustion. Mm-hmm. It's like when you light a fire, the coal or the log combusts. That's combustion. But there is a higher level, if you like, of combustion called pyrolysis. And that is the extremely high temperature at which these chemicals break down. Anyway, chemicals are broken down. They are generally of a hydrocarbon or organophosphate in nature. They enter into the airstream in the cabin. There is a little bit of filtration that helps out. The fumes from these chemicals then appear in the cabin, and sometimes you see videos on YouTube where you see smoke and or a mist, if you like, in the aircraft cabin. Not to be confused with the sheets of mist that you see sometimes coming down from the air conditioning unit when you get on board the aircraft. That's not the same thing at all. That's just pure condensation. The problem with these chemicals is, because of their toxic nature, they deliver health deficits to pilots, which, when you're flying an aircraft or being flown on an aircraft, you don't want your pilot incapacitated in any way. But there are pilots and cabin crew and indeed passengers who have suffered serious respiratory problems. They go on to suffer nerve problems. Some have suffered brain damage. There is those who claim that they have suffered cancers, skin problems. And the issue is that governments around the world are refusing to recognize that this is a problem. And so I'm very heavily involved in this. I deal with consumers, I talk to pilots and crew, and I sit on two committees, one in the United States and one here in Europe, where we're trying to create law, if you like, through the standardization process. So in Europe, if we create a standard, that standard can be incorporated into law. And what we're trying to do is to create the conditions whereby the problem is recognized, the solutions are delivered, and our aircraft become safer. So it's looking at like early warning systems to help the crew, the pilots in particular, to decide the extent of the danger and whether or not to bring the plane down and safeguard the passengers. From my point of view, my view is that whilst all this is going on, because this may take years to resolve, a passenger should have a right to know. So if there's a fume event on board the aircraft, passengers should not just simply be packed off and sent home. They should be handed written information as to what's happened to them, the kind of incident it was, the kind of chemicals they were exposed to, so that they can present that to their medical advisors, their medical practitioners. And so we're working our way through that with the European Commission, the European Parliament, and also the European Aviation Safety Agency. But politically, the momentum is still on the side of the aviation industry, and but as technology improves, the pressure grows upon the governments or a government and the industry to import those changes. So, for example, the Dreamliner we all hear about, that doesn't employ bleed air through the engines. If you look at the side of the aircraft, you'll see vents just before the wing sweeps out from the fuselage. That is an air intake that supplies the air into the Dreamliner, and so therefore it's not contaminated by oils or any other contaminant like hydraulic fluid and stuff like that. But there is now microtechnology, mostly developed in France, which hopefully is going to be capable of being installed on aircraft and also detect the range of chemicals that may escape into the aircraft environment.
You're listening to The Travel Show with John Guinn on ukhealthradio.com. Still to come on the show, Dr. Susan Barton, who's talking about Saga's 65th anniversary. But at the moment, I'm speaking to Frank from Holiday Travel Watch. We're talking about the quality of the air in aircraft cabin. Can it make you ill? You may not have heard of it, but maybe it's because of the reporting process. Maybe the event that has to be at such a high level before it gets recorded that this sort of problem is underreported, and that's the next thing I put towards Frank. As I understand it, for a fume event to be recorded, the bar is quite high, so there could be lots of contamination in the cabin before it actually gets recorded. So do you feel there's an under-recording of such incidents?
Well, in any flight, the captain fills in at the end of the flight what his experience was in the handling of the aircraft, and as part of that record, he has to take into account any complaints made by passengers and crew. And so it may well be, if a fume event is reported, he should be completing an MOR, which is a mandatory occurrence report. And that should be lodged with the flight documentation. And, copies of that go to the engineers, and it goes to, in this country, it goes to the Civil Aviation Authority. There have been plenty of instances where pilots haven't done that. For whatever reason, there's plenty of speculation why, but that is the law. That's what the regulation says should happen. So I had, up until I met these pilots and crew, I'd never experienced anything like this. I'd been on plenty of aircraft where I'd smelt strange smells, a very strong smell of fuel. But there was one flight that I took where, as the plane was descending, coming into land, there was an extremely strong odor of dirty, smelly socks, which is the common experience of people who report fume events. And before I got off the aircraft, I reported it to the cabin crew. And I did tell them that I would be checking up on it, and I would expect to see a mandatory occurrence report. And sure enough, one was completed. So, as I say, I'm not an ordinary consumer. I have this knowledge that I've acquired over a period of time. But I do know of consumers who've made similar reports to aircrew, and the aircrew have told them not to worry, there's nothing unusual. They've given them plenty of platitudes about how safe the aircraft is, and they've just left it at that. They haven't said, well, we'll make sure there's a report made. They haven't handed them any information or said, you can write here and tell more about this. And I think this is where aircrew, aircrew accept the criticism. This is where aircrew need to up the ante. They have a responsibility on the aircraft, not just to the flight itself, but to the flight afterwards. And they should be making the reports. They're obligated to do so by law.
Cranfield University did an investigation into cabin air quality a few years ago, and they said it's no more contaminated than an average domestic setting. And other reports say that the air is recycled more often than if you go to the theatre. But again, if you've got a problem with the bleed bit, then you're just bringing in the contaminated air all the time. So I don't know how they can say the air's recycled, because you're getting more and more of the bad stuff. But with Cranfield saying it's just like being in a domestic building, does that mean the problem's not being taken seriously, or they're looking in the wrong place?
The Cranfield study is generally now not considered to be a good study. Mm-hmm. There are plenty in the aviation industry who hold it out still, but there are plenty far more knowledgeable than I who have demonstrated why the Cranfield study can't be relied on. But you hit the nail on the head there, John, about the argument that's made. I was in Amsterdam the other week talking about all of this. And the one mantra from the aviation industry is that the air quality is good, if not better, than indoor air quality. Well, I spoke with somebody quite senior from Germany about this the other week, and I managed to extract out of them that essentially the aviation industry have hung their coat on the indoor air quality